Day 1 of the 2026 F1 preseason test just happened. But what you saw in the official headlines barely scratches the surface. Yes, Red Bull topped the timesheets. Yes, Mercedes ran more laps than anyone else. But what actually unfolded at Barcelona was far more chaotic than anyone expected. Because 7 teams ran. 4 didn't. 3 cars stopped on track. And not a single second of it was broadcast live. Behind closed garages, security checkpoints, and 12 photo per team limitations. Was one of the most fragmented, secretive, and unstable first days of testing Formula One has ever seen. And it's what the cameras didn't show that tells the real story. It should have been a calm start. Day 1 of preseason testing is usually uneventful. Some installation laps, maybe a red flag or 2, but nothing out of the ordinary. But this wasn't ordinary. Because this time, the cars weren't just new. The entire formula had changed. The 2026 power units aren't just evolutions. They're different machines entirely. A 50-50 power split between internal combustion and hybrid. 16:1 fixed compression ratios. No MGUH. New weight distributions, new fuel flow targets, new aero baselines. The kind of technical reset that breaks even the most experienced teams. And the pressure was immediate. Because this wasn't Bahrain. This was Barcelona, in January. Colder, riskier, and far less forgiving. Red Bull, Mercedes, Alpine, Audi, Cadillac, Haas, and Racing Bulls all showed up. But Ferrari didn't. McLaren didn't. Aston Martin and Williams? Also missing. And that silence spoke volumes. Because while the teams who ran were collecting data, the ones who stayed home weren't just skipping laps. They were admitting, publicly, that they weren't ready. And in a new regulatory cycle, that's not just a delay. That's a warning sign. The paddock atmosphere wasn't celebratory. There was no press hype. No broadcast feed. In fact, most of what we saw came from one corner of the track. And a handful of heavily censored team photos. F1 labeled the session a shakedown. But what it really felt like was containment. Because underneath the lap counts and fuel loads, everyone was already asking the same thing. Who actually built a car that works? And who's still hiding a disaster? Red Bull ran. Of course they did. They always run, early, fast, and tight-lipped. But even with Verstappen and Tsunoda logging laps, there was a strange unease around the garage. No long runs. No full race simulations. And no sign of the high-speed confidence we've come to expect. It looked more like damage control, not dominance. Mercedes showed up too. They did the most laps of any team. But that's not the whole story. Because while the W15E looked stable on track, it didn't sound right. The engine note was clean, but dull, like something was being held back. There are rumors they ran in ultra-conservative hybrid mode, to protect a system that still hasn't hit its thermal targets. Then there's Audi. The newcomers. Visually, the car looked planted. And the noise coming out of Nürburgring is quietly confident. But insiders say they've built something extremely complex. And are already 2 months behind on full power deployment. Alpine's day was chaotic. 2 stoppages. 1 electrical. 1 fuel-related. And at one point, Ocon climbed out shaking his head, not in frustration, but like he was recalculating what this season might actually become. Then there's Ferrari. The team with the most eyes on them didn't run at all. And while they said their car wasn't scheduled to appear, the truth is, they weren't ready. Their power unit program is months ahead of schedule. But their Aero platform? Still being rebalanced after pushrod integration. McLaren and Aston Martin also skipped, but for very different reasons. McLaren is known to delay public appearances if their systems aren't 100% live. And Aston, well, their internal silence right now feels less strategic, and more like they're in the middle of a serious packaging crisis. In a normal year, 1 or 2 no-shows might be noise. But 4 major teams staying off track on day 1 of a new rule set? That's a pattern. And patterns in F1 always mean something. Red Bull looked smooth. Visually, the car tracked well through turns 3 and 9. Clean inputs. Predictable balance. But behind the scenes, not everything aligns. Several sources say the Red Bull powertrains unit, now in its final integration phase, still struggles with hybrid overheating. Not on the dyno, but under race rep cooling loads. Which would explain why Tsunoda ran short stints. And why Verstappen kept his pace well below the threshold where energy recovery matters. And yet, no team said a word. Not Red Bull. Not Honda. Not even RB. Because at this stage, silence is strategy. Mercedes showed consistency. But there's one detail that caught attention. They were using an older energy deployment map. Which makes no sense unless the current map is unstable. And if that's true, it would mean their hybrid system, the most politically scrutinized in the paddock, still isn't running in its full configuration. At Alpine, the contradictions were more visual. They showed up with a car that looked finished, but drove like a prototype. Multiple electrical resets, unscheduled fuel cell inspections, and one radio transmission, quietly leaked, that mentioned full system sync delay. That's not language you use if you're chasing lap times. That's what you say when the car doesn't know how to talk to itself yet. Even Audi, the best prepared of the debutants, had one moment that raised eyebrows. Schumacher climbed out of the car unusually early, after just 11 laps. It wasn't mechanical. It was procedural. Some think it was tied to battery discharge protocols. Others believe the team is intentionally limiting cycle counts to avoid triggering FIA system review thresholds too early in the test phase. None of this is in the press releases. None of it makes the social clips. But it's happening. And it's the reason why day one matters. Not for the lap times, but for the things that don't line up. There's one word no team wants to say right now: integration. Because the engines themselves, the combustion side, are mostly stable. The batteries work. The turbo systems run. On paper, the pieces are ready. But in practice? They're not talking to each other. Every team is wrestling with invisible problems. Power units that spike temperatures in unpredictable corners. Energy systems that desync with brake migration. Cars that enter a corner in one mode and exit in another. It's not mechanical. It's behavioral. That's what makes this test so unstable. Not because things are breaking, but because teams don't fully understand what's working yet. Hybrid lag, torque delivery sync, heat transfer between MGUK and rear axle. These aren't things you fix with new parts. They take weeks of calibration. Weeks that, for some teams, are already gone. Ferrari is reportedly dealing with this exact issue. The 0.67.6 engine runs clean. The chassis balance is consistent. But the energy deployment across a full lap? Still unpredictable, especially under high-speed downshifts. At Mercedes, it's worse in the opposite direction. Their hybrid deployment works well in isolation, but overheats when paired with aggressive chassis yaw. Even Red Bull isn't immune. Their system is fast, no doubt, but it's so tightly packaged that their cooling margin is under review by FIA observers. Because if they're already on the limit in 12 degrees Celsius Barcelona air, what happens in Bahrain at 36 degrees Celsius? This is what no one's saying. The cars exist, but no one's really sure how much of them is actually working. In Formula One, early mistakes don't just cost you time. They cost you freedom. Because once the season starts, your development path gets narrower. Your power unit is frozen. Your hardware is locked. And your only escape route is through software, if you're lucky. That's why these day one problems matter so much. Not because anyone was fast or slow, but because some teams have already run out of room to be wrong. Ferrari, for example, committed to a conservative hybrid layout. Lower compression, tighter packaging, more reliable thermal integration. But that means if their power is down, they have nowhere to go. Red Bull, on the other hand, is running so close to the limit. In cooling, in energy cycles, in weight, that if their package doesn't work in Bahrain, they can't just turn it down. They'd have to redesign the entire recovery loop, something that's not even allowed after homologation. Then there's Mercedes. Quiet, efficient, conservative. But if they've overcooled their hybrid system to buy margin now, they'll be carrying dead weight all year. And in this new formula, extra grams matter more than ever. Even Audi, who look composed, might be cornered. Their modular energy system is powerful, but complex. And once the mapping is locked, they can't simplify it without tearing down the entire logic of the car. So if they've over-engineered, they're stuck with it. This is how day one becomes the first race. Not on the clock, but in decisions. Design decisions that already separate those who were right early from those who will be wrong all year. And that's the danger no one can say out loud. That someone may have already lost 2026 before they've even finished building the car. No lap times were published. No official comparisons. No performance runs. And yet, we already know more than the teams wanted us to. Not because they told us, but because of what they didn't show. Because this wasn't a test of speed. It was a test of readiness. Of control. Of how much risk teams were willing to show in public, and how much they had to hide. The teams that ran exposed their limits. The teams that stayed home exposed their fears. And that's the unsettling part. That 4 teams didn't even try. Not because they were behind schedule, but because they weren't sure what would happen if they pushed the system too far, too early. What we saw on day one was a snapshot of fragility. Cars that are too complex to tame in a single day. Power units that might be fast, but also unstable. And systems that, under pressure, may still unravel. This isn't just a new season. It's a new language. A new balance between combustion and hybrid. Between heat and control. Between silence and failure. And if this is only the beginning, then the question isn't who's fastest. The question is, who actually understands what they've built? And who's about to find out, the hard way?